So what we're working with in alchemy, in this work, is memory. And we're working with memory, but not memory as in remember what you had for lunch yesterday. So if you remember what you had for lunch yesterday, that memory will come as an image. And then if you stay with that image long enough, you can talk about it, concepts. And if you stay with that image long enough, you will be able to smell the food, remember the taste of the food in your mouth, hear the sounds that were around you. If you stay there long enough, if you stay with the memory long enough, you can be there again, right? And a lot of us actually live like that. We live in those kind of memories. But the behavior of living in those memories is coming out of another memory. And the memory that we're dealing with here is the memory of imprinting, what we call imprinting. And this imprinting is an emotional signature that is imprinted into our emotional body in the first 7 years. Now the thing about this work, another thing about this work which eventually we'll get to a point of realizing, is that this work is not personal. It's not personal. It's nothing personal. What makes it personal to us initially is that when we are imprinted as children, we are imprinted through an experience that is happening to us, right? It appears that something is happening to us. It's the way, it's like that you have when you go and get a tattoo, the tattoo gun is, you go and ask for the tattoo and go, I want this particular tattoo, right? And then the tattoo gun comes along and tattoos you. And there's a person holding the tattoo gun. And if you're unconscious, you would blame them for doing that to you, right? So when we have this experience during our childhood of things that happen to us which are deliberate, and the word deliberate contains the word liberate, things that happen to us during childhood that impact our emotional body. At some point in our journey, we will realize that this is deliberate. But because they happen to us personally, I feel personal about this. Like I have something that happens to me in my childhood and it's traumatic, and it implants a trauma of fear in my being. And I will be able to tell someone the story as best as I recollect it or I'm told of what happened to me. And because I can tell the story, then this memory is something personal to me. But actually, in reality, it's not personal. Because that emotional signature, when you sink into your own emotional signatures, and you start to be able to have some insight about them, what you will realize is that you share this dysfunctional definition of the vibrational, which is what an emotional signature is. All an emotional signature is when energy is moving and it gets conditioned. It gets parameters put around it. It becomes conditional. It has to move in a certain way, not in its natural flow. And when it moves in an unnatural way, or it has conditions put on it, it causes this discomfort, and we call those discomforts fear, anger, or grief. We express them as, but it's really energy that's moving in a particular way, that's been defined because of circumstances. And what you will find when you go into your own emotional signature and really be with it, what you will realize is that you share this emotional signature with your parents and your siblings, that they also are having experiences that are reflecting an emotional signature within them. And although the experiences may vary and look different to yours in the physical world, and the stories they tell may be different, actually the deeper you get into your own emotional signature, the deeper I get into my own emotional signature, the more I'm able to perceive what's going on with my mother and father, of why they were the way they were. Because actually they were imprinted with that emotional signature as children too. And their parents were imprinted with that emotional signature. And what a family unit is this group of beings, this group of souls that sort of huddle around a particular emotional signature. And they all share the same emotional signature. And one generation is called the human race. You know the term, the human race? The human race is when one generation runs along and passes the baton onto the next one through imprinting. And then the child takes the baton and then they run into all the doings that they do to try and feel better. And then they pass it on to the next generation, and so it goes on. And what is remarkable about this place that we are in our evolution is that we can just stop now and go, hang on a moment. What is this baton that I'm hitting my head and hitting other people over the head with? Why is this going on? Why? My mother and father did it, their mother and father did it, I'm doing it, I've been passing it on to my kids, but hang on a moment, right? And what we'll notice is this baton or this imprint, whatever it is, the power of this work is, it's the same as if I took the presence, if we say that there is a presence within you, a presence that observes and witnesses everything that you go through and that is unchanged by your experience. No matter what happens to you, it remains unchanged. If I took that presence out of each of you, right, and I put them all behind my back and I shuffled them up and I said, which one is yours? There would still only be one in my hand. Because there is only one presence and it has many expressions, right? It's the same with our emotional signature. If I went into my family, my own family, and I went to my mother and I took her emotional signature out, and I took my father's out, and I took my brother and my sisters out, and I huddled them around my back and I took out there'd only be one there. And the causal point of it is within me. It's not in my mother for me. It's in my mother for my mother. It's in my brother for my brother. But the causal point of the emotional signature in my experience is inside of me. If I impact it inside of me, because it's the same emotional signature as in everyone else in my family, it starts to transform in all of my family. But I mustn't do it as a means to change them. You can't trick the heart. You can't go, a lot of parents have this problem. Well, I'm doing the presence process and I'm waiting to see when it's going to help my children. Well, now you're stuck because you've placed conditions on this work. And this work only gets to a certain point and will not move any further if we're placing any conditions on this. That's why it's very important to remember the wax on, wax off analogy, to know that we actually don't know why we're doing this. So every story we tell ourselves, it's just what we think it is, because it's going to reveal itself as something else as we go along. But the main thing is the memory that we are dealing with, the emotional imprint itself, has been passed from generation to generation to generation. And I have my story about how it was imprinted into me. My mother and father have their story about how it was imprinted into them. Their parents have their story about how it was imprinted into them. And every one of our stories is different. So the story is not true. The story has no relevance. The only relevance of the story is to take us to the emotional signature. The only relevance of the mental body is to use it within this work, because the mental body has many powerful uses. But the only relevance for the mental body in this work, one of the only purposes it has, is to get us to the emotional signature. And once that emotional signature is resolved, we will receive insight, and the mental body can contain those insights. But it doesn't require any more understanding. Understanding doesn't change the emotional signature. It can bring access to it. But once we have access to this emotional signature, the only thing that impacts it in a way that brings it to resolution is being with it, not understanding it. So telling our story and thinking that if I understand what happened to me as a child, that's somehow going to sort things out, well, we've already shown that that doesn't work. Because there are many of us that have sat and explained our story over and over and over and over. It didn't change anything. We felt better, but this is not about feeling better. This is about getting better at feeling. Feeling better doesn't last very long. It's very temporary. All right? So we'll need to go and talk again so I can feel better again. And then I'll need to go and talk again. So I can just go on like that for eternity. Right? If I think that talking is going to accomplish the shift, I will be talking for eternity, because it won't. I'll feel better and then I'll need to go and talk again. So that's very important to realize, as there's this, what we're working with here, the imprint that we're working with. These memories are emotional signatures, and they are not personal. And that the power of it is when I impact it authentically within myself through my awareness of it and being with it. That's what makes the difference in the world. Not me going around and trying to impact it in other people, right? That's when I go around trying to help other people so that I feel better about myself. And that help isn't actually help at all. It's called interference. Wherever the UN goes, it interferes. And everywhere the UN goes, for example, if you look, just always look, by their fruits they shall be known, by their deeds they know. Wherever the UN goes, whatever country it goes into, goes to its knees and can never stand up again because of all the help it's received, right? We don't want to be helping people. We don't want to be giving people fish. We want to show them how to fish. And the only way you show people how to fish is go down to the beach and fish yourself, right? Become a fisherman yourself, right? So that behavior of going around trying to help other people, that doesn't impact this emotional signature. It just helps us to feel better about ourselves. If I give a lot of money to starving people over there, I'll get to feel better, but I'm not going to change anything. I'm more than likely going to deprive those people over there from knowing how to manifest abundance for themselves and crippling them completely. So it's very important when we go into this work that we realize it's not personal. Although it impacts us impersonally, because when we go into this work we feel it physically, mentally and emotionally, and it feels very personal, but it's not personal. It's like we're here doing a job. An alchemist goes in and does the job, does the work, right? So that's the first thing. So let's look at this in terms of our relationship with ourselves, because that's where it begins. And our relationship with ourselves, there are 3 levels of perception running simultaneously in any given moment. And determined by where our attention is anchored, our awareness is anchored, is determined to how we perceive the world. The first level of awareness, which is where most human beings are at, looks like this. Those people over there are gossipers. You know, they just talk about other people all day. They don't do anything else but talk about other people. They just stand around and talk about other people. And they're probably talking about me. I wish that they would find something else to do but talk about other people, right? There are better things to do in this world than talk about other people, right? So that's the one level of awareness. And that level of awareness is called the physical level of awareness, right? And in that level, I perceive the world as the way people behave towards each other and towards me. The world is happening to me in that physical level of awareness. Then, if we gather enough presence, and one of the things of this breathing technique in the presence process is it enables us to harvest presence. Because as we start resolving, remember how presence is harvested. It isn't harvested by forcing yourself to be present. You can try that all you want. It won't help. The way you become present is you go to where your attention is hooked unconsciously into unintegrated emotional signatures and resolve it so that your attention automatically comes back into the moment, and you'll feel more present without trying to be present, right? So as we harvest presence, our awareness will shift automatically. It's organic. And so the next level of perception is when I perceive that I'm standing here doing the very thing that I'm accusing other people of doing, right? It's harder to see that, where I go, hang on a moment, I'm standing here gossiping about those people myself. That's actually why they annoy me, because they're doing what I'm doing, which I don't want people to know that I do, right? So that's the mental level, right? We call that going into the mental, and we get a mental understanding of our behavior. The next level is related to when we receive some insight. When we start doing enough emotional body work that we gain some insight. And that level is when I realize, hang on a moment, I gossip to myself about myself all day. I'm saying, Michael, you're just such an idiot. You're never going to get this together. You always mess it up at that point. Why aren't you ever going to get it together, right? And I'm actually gossiping to myself about myself all day. And now I'm getting to that's on an emotional level, right? That's now we're getting to the emotional level. But even that isn't it. That insight will take me to the causal point. And the causal point of that is when I realize that underlying my tendency to gossip to myself about myself is an uncomfortable feeling. And it's that uncomfortable feeling that breeds those stories, right? And when it breeds those stories, it also breeds that behavior that I have towards other people, and it also causes me to perceive the world in that way, to bring those out of the billions of things going on in this nanosecond, I happen to be concentrating on two people gossiping. Why is my point of focus there and not somewhere else? And that's because of that emotional signature. Because I'm always going to look out at the world and see what's going on inside myself. I'm always going to look towards that which I recognize in myself, right? So if I'm gossiping towards myself, I will gossip about other people, and I will perceive other people gossiping to each other, right? So it's only when I go in and adjust that emotional signature, when I allow myself to be with that uncomfortable feeling so that it can move to a point of resolution. And when it moves on and comes to a point of resolution and then it becomes integrated, those stories, that behavior towards myself will stop. Then that behavior that I have towards other people won't manifest, and I won't even notice that in the world. It won't come up on my radar screen. It's organic and it's totally natural. I don't have to force anything to happen. I just have to take care of what's going on at the causal point. So let's look at the coming up of a memory, right? Let's kind of play this out to see how it looks like in our ordinary day, because we don't have to go anywhere to do this work. The universe is full of grace. It will bring it to us on a silver tray when we least expect it, right? So let's for example say, who should I pick on today? I'll pick on you, right? Okay. So what happens is, I come to work in the morning, right? And I'm 15 minutes late. I'm always late because I'm hurrying, right? Hey, you'll notice that people who are always late are always hurrying. If you remove hurrying, you'll stop being late, all right? So I'm always hurrying, and so I'm always late. And I'm 15 minutes late for work, and I walk in, and I look in through the doorway into my boss's office, and he looks at me with a snarl on his face, right? Right? And I walk past the door, and I go, you know what? I go into my office, and I say to myself, you know what? I don't deserve to be treated this way. Okay, I'm 15 minutes late. I get it, right? But the fact is, I do my work. I work really hard. I should be more appreciated in this, right? I don't deserve to be treated in this manner at all, right? Now, the moment that that's happened, what I do not realize is that as I walked past the door and you looked at me, you being my boss, looked at me in that way, I was triggered, right? And from that second, I entered an altered state of consciousness, right? Because what happened was the universe facilitated me into entering a memory bank. I walked into a memory bank. And the thing about the universe is when we commit to doing this work, the universe goes, okay, now we can bring you all the stuff that's going on inside of you that you can't see inside because you don't have insight. We can bring it to you as stuff happening outside of you, right? And so we'll use the outside world to trigger you. And because the presence in me and the presence in all of you and in every human being and in every animal and in every tree is the same presence, we can be facilitated by anybody, anything, anywhere in the universe at any time. Wherever you go, there you are. So what the universe does is it knows how to trigger me so that I can have a recall of something that is I don't even have a memory of, and I don't have the insight to see it going on in my emotional body. So what it does is it shows it to me outside so I remember it. So as I walk past the office, you kind of like make a facial expression at me, and in that moment, that facial expression reminds me of something. I don't even have to know what it is. It just reminds me. And because it reminds me of an unintegrated experience in which my emotional body has this dysfunctional definition of energy, what happens is I enter that energy package, an awareness of that energy package. I literally walk perceptually into the memory bank and enter an altered state. And in that altered state, I'm no longer here. If I look at you, and you remind me of my father, I no longer see you. You have disappeared. I now see an illusion, right? And if I behave around you the way I behaved around my father, I'm now in a state of delusion, right? I have now entered an altered state. Whenever we are triggered, whenever we become upset, which means we are being set up by the universe to see something outside which we don't have the capacity to see inside yet, whenever I'm upset, what's happening is I'm entering an altered state of consciousness. An altered state of consciousness in which I function as a deluded being. The world becomes an illusion, and I function in a deluded way. And there are two, when a being becomes deluded, there are two paths of movement that are open to that being. Only two that will happen. And it's so predictable, you can see it happen. The one is, I will immediately start telling a story, right? Because I feel very uncomfortable, and out of that discomfort, I'm going to start telling a story. I'm tired of working in this place. I'm tired of not being appreciated, right? He doesn't appreciate me, even though, okay, I'm only 15 minutes late, but that should be no reason for him to be snarling at me as I walk past the office. I deserve to be treated better than this. I'll tell the story. If I tell the story long enough, what happens is that story will hypnotize me. It's like self-hypnosis. Eventually, through that self-hypnosis, I will enter a physical behavior based on that story. And so what that physical behavior may look like is this. All right, dear sir, okay, right. And I walk in, I go to the office, right? And I'll walk in and I'll say, I'm sick and tired of the way you treat me. Here is my resignation. Thank you very much. And I'll walk out, and what happens? I feel better. I feel better now. I'm the man. I showed him, I told him. But what happens? 3 days later, I go, oh, right? That was a really, really, really stupid thing to do. I mean, I don't even recognize the person who was behaving like that. Why? Because that person was in an altered state. He was behaving like a mad person, right? And 3 days later, I don't have a job, I have no income, and I'm probably not going to get a very good reference from my boss. And I go, oh, why did I even do that? And we know that experience. You know, when someone writes you a shitty email, and you go immediately and send off a shitty reply, and then 2 minutes later you go, oh, I shouldn't have sent that email. Oh dear, I want to get it back, you know? I think that's why they developed that Finder, or that program where you can go and fish things back off the internet to save us from our altered states, because we literally go into an altered state of consciousness, right? And so if I don't enter physical behavior, I may get into a very mental state about what happens when I see my boss snarl. And that will look like this. Excuse me, but we need to have a talk, right? Blah, 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 right? If anybody comes to you and says, we need to have a talk, you know you are dealing with someone who is in a state of delusion. Do not try to reason. Do not try to reason with people that are in states of delusion. You will only end up joining them in that place. All right? And that's really the first step in alchemy, is that there's no way around this, there's only a way through it. In order to process, to bring these emotional signatures to resolution, we literally enter the memory bank. And the memory, you see, the memory isn't actually the physical circumstance. Although he may look at me and remind me, for example, he may remind me of something my stepfather did when I was young. Let's say, right? That really angered me and made me just want to give up, right? Because I tried so hard and I wasn't acknowledged. It may remind me of that imprint when I was a child, right? So the physical may remind me. The story may have a clue as to what's really going on. My boss never appreciates me, I'm never appreciated. It may have a clue, but actually neither are the memory that we want to get to. The physical circumstance and the emotional and the mental story are a means to access the emotional signature. The memory, as it really authentically is, which is not at all personal, because it's an energy that's been passed from generation to generation. The memory is how I am feeling in that moment of the upset. How I am feeling in the moment of the upset. And I may be able to put a spell on this energy pattern, in other words, spell it a particular way. I may call it fear, I may call it anger, and I may call it grief. And it may be useful to spell it first and say, I feel angry, right? So I describe it to myself. But that memory is actually an energetic circumstance. It really doesn't have a name. We named it. It's a dysfunctional energetic circumstance. It's a conditional state. We've taken the vibrational and we've placed it into a conditional state, right? That conditional state causes friction, makes us very uncomfortable, so we tell stories about it and have whole lots of philosophies about it, but actually it's just an energetic circumstance. My task as an alchemist is to sink into this memory, into the feeling aspect of it, and to feel it, to allow it to be there, to be with it. And if I allow it to be there, it will automatically unfold. Remember, last night we were talking about how when the child comes into the room, and if the child is angry and you have integrated your anger, and you be with the child instead of reprimanding it or interfering with it or giving it a sweet and telling it to play outside, if you be with an angry child, that anger will peak, then there will be tears, then there will be a sense of peace, and then the child will go out and play without having a sweet stuck in its mouth. If you just be with the child, allow the child to be in its experience, and that its experience is valid. The thing about one of the dangerous things about the various spiritual paths and religions available to us on the planet is they lead us to believe that our experience is not valid, right? You're supposed to be at peace. You're supposed to be one. You're supposed to be loving and understanding, all right? And so when you're having an experience in which you're really just very pissed off, then there's another voice going, you're not supposed to be like that. You're supposed to, all right? And so then you be nice to cover it up. And what you'll find when you really realize what niceness is toxic behavior, because you can't trust anyone who's nice. They will tell you what they think they should tell you so that there's no conflict. They will say yes when they mean no and no when they mean yes. That's what nice is. And niceness is poisonous to our souls, right? So it's not about being nice. It's also not about projecting our anger into this world onto other people. But it's very important that when I am angry, I allow myself to be in that anger. That anger, if I'm triggered and I'm angry, that anger is valid. It's a valid experience. It's valid because it is coming from an imprint in my emotional body. Otherwise, it wouldn't be there. You can't anger someone who already doesn't have an imprint of anger within them that is unresolved. So when the anger comes up, it's valid to be angry. It's not valid to go, I'm not supposed to be angry, I'm supposed to be peace, I'm supposed to be one. You know, anger is evil, it's the devil, right? And no, it's not. It's the keys to liberation. Right? So our experience, the thing about doing this work, is a realization that whatever experience I'm having in any moment is valid. What is important though is, am I reacting to it or am I responding to it? right? And in order to respond to it requires that I gain a certain amount of presence so that I can become conscious when I'm in an altered state. So that I can become conscious when I'm in an altered state, because that's what this work is initially about. It's about being willing to enter altered states and to remain as conscious as possible in them, right? So initially, when we learn about this going from reactive to responsive behavior, there are certain levels of development in this, certain levels of gathering presence. Initially, I will walk, so, okay, let's say now, I go and do something like the presence process, right? And in the first 6 weeks, it teaches me about the messenger and how to get the message and all of this stuff, and teaches me that there is a way to respond rather than react, and that this is a memory, and I want to interact with this memory through feeling it. So I get all this mentally. The mental body gets this. Wow, that's really smart and clever, right? But what happens is, even though I know all of this, I walk past my boss's office, he looks at me with that look on his face, and I still get triggered, right? I enter an altered state, and I go, oh, I'm not going to stand this sort of behavior, blah, blah, blah. And only after my anger is passed, after maybe an hour or two, I go, oh, that was a hell of a setup. I didn't even see that coming, right? There's a saying in Christian scripture, it says, I shall come as a thief in the night. Right? What does it mean? I will come as a thief in the night. A thief in the night is when I'm asleep in my experience, right? I'm completely asleep in my experience, and someone wakes me up to what's really going on with me. They wake me up in the middle of my dream sleepy state. And the upset, whenever we have an upset, that's the thief in the night. I shall come as a thief in the night. The Christ is the crisis. This is the closest word. The crisis is the one in the Gnostic Gospels. It says, I don't come to bring peace to this world. I come with sword, with fire, with war. I come to cleave Father from Son. I'm not coming here to bring peace to your illusions. I'm coming here to be the crisis that awakens you up, so that you realize you're living in a memory bank, in an unintegrated experience. So even though I may know all that, I'll still walk past the office and my boss looks at me and I freak out initially, and after an hour or so I go, wow, that was a big upset. I got by that one, right? And then what happens, as I gather more presence, I do the work, then I'll walk past the office and I'll get upset. You'll look at me and I'll go, oh, that's a bit stupid. I'll catch myself in mid-reaction and realize what's going on because I've got more presence. I'm able to get conscious within an altered state a lot quicker. And then what will happen is I will know those triggers before I even come across them. I will know I'm going to walk past his office. He's going to look at me that way. I know it's going to trigger me, but I already see it coming. And I still feel the anger, but I'm no longer driven by the charge. I'm now starting to turn around and face the charge, right? So if I'm working with a certain imprint, just because I be with it for an hour doesn't mean it's gone. Remember, some of these imprints are ancient. We have all level of imprint. Our imprint is our own, maybe to do with our own personal adventure as a being, but we have many imprints. We have cultural imprint. We have racial imprints. We have religious imprints. We have imprints about our sex, our sexuality. There's all sorts of imprints. Status and class imprints. There's all sorts of imprints that happen in the first 7 years of our life, right? So working with these imprints is not about, okay, I'm going to do this job and it's over with. Sometimes we can sit with one dose of anger or one emotional signature for a while, and we work through it and work through it and work through it until we resolve it, right? So sometimes I may get to a point where I know that I'm going to walk past his office, he's going to look at me in a certain way, I am going to get pissed off about it, and I'm going to go into my office, but now I'm conscious in this altered state. Yes, I feel angry. I feel really angry. But I now know it has nothing to do with him at all. He's just the trigger. What it really is about the anger within my being, about this energetic situation that I was imprinted with as a child, that I carry within me. So that's where the work really begins. The work really begins when I start to contain this experience. And by containing it, I mean not telling a story about what's going on, and not entering the physical behavior as a consequence of the story. It's not about sedating or suppressing this experience. It's not about trying to feel better because I feel uncomfortable. It's about allowing myself to feel what is really going on. That is the moment when the work really, really starts to kick in. That is the moment when alchemy starts. Because in that moment, then there is going to be an energetic situation that's going to start unfolding. So for example, I can contain that during the day, and I say to myself, okay, I'm at work, I'm not going to push this anger away, but maybe this evening I can really sit with this, right? So I go through my day's work, I don't cancel my day, I'll be very aware that I'm going to be quite aggressive today. I'm not going to be assertive, I'm going to be somewhat aggressive. So I take care when I'm around people because I know I'm angry. I know how angry I am. So I take care, I'm extra compassionate with myself and people around me. I don't stop the anger. And that night I go home and I, whatever, do what I got to do. And then I sit down in a quiet place with myself and I go, okay, what happened today? Let's take a look at this, right? Now I can really do some dedicated work, some dedicated alchemy work. And what I do in that moment is I use the physical world and the mental world as a means to get it fully in touch with that emotional signature again. I start telling myself the story. Well, I was coming to work, I was 15 minutes late. I looked in the office, my boss's office, and he snarled at me, right? He made this face, and I immediately started to feel angry about it. And when I'm telling the story, what I'll notice is the emotional signature will start to rise in my being. The moment it does, the physical and the mental aspect of it no longer serve me. They don't serve me anymore. The only thing that serves me now is to figure out, where am I feeling this anger in my being? Where is it? Is it in my chest somewhere? Is it in my hands? Where am I feeling? Sometimes my face goes hot. And then my task is to be with that. Just be with it. And initially it's challenging because I've become a master at sedating and controlling, at pushing it out of my awareness. So often, as I put my attention on it, it just goes away. So I can tell the story again and bring it up and be with it. And be with it until I can really hook into it, allow it to be there and actually sit in this energy. And when I successfully sit in this energy will start to build. Like that child who starts to rage more when you allow it to be angry around you. It'll start to, this feeling will build and build and build. And what will happen is you will start to, at some point, it'll become so uncomfortable that you will start to enter what's called the death experience. And you're entering the death experience because when we enter the death experience, our thoughts start saying things like this. There's no hope. I can't do this anymore. This doesn't work. There's no point. I mean, I might as well be dead. There's no future in this, right? Nothing has ever worked. There is no God. There's no meaning in life. It's actually, we go into this death experience and our thoughts will reflect it. And what we want to do is stay in the death. You want to go ahead and die. Go ahead and die already, right? Because what that death is really when energetically, when we bring the presence of this moment, the presence that we are in this moment, to bear upon an energetic circumstance that has something to do with the past, that no longer has any relevance in this moment, that has to die. It doesn't exist now, and it has to die. And we're going to go through that death experience as that energetic circumstance dies in us. And as it goes to a point of death, because it's not true, it's not real, it has got nothing to do with now. It's something that happened long, long time ago. We too go through the death experience. That's the shamanic experience. Like people talk about shamanism, and they want to talk about, their feathers and their journeys or their ceremonies and stuff. And yeah, that's all has its purpose. But what is the shamanic experience really? The shamanic experience is when I just go ahead and die. I go ahead and die to what's not true. I sit within the middle of this emotional signature, whether it's fear, anger, or grief. I sit in the midst of it and allow it to be there so that it can be seen for what it is, which is the past. And it can go ahead and die. Energetically, it will go to a point of death. And what will happen as we enter that death experience, we may even go to tears. There's the sobbing or something, there may be a deep physical reaction, a response that may come up. And once that passes, we will enter a feeling of stillness, of peace, because in this moment there is only peace. If you don't realize the peace, it's because you're bringing something from the past here. There is only peace in the now, in this moment, right? And what happens is a part of us that has been engaged in the past and entangled up in this unintegrated experience will return to this moment. It'll be reborn into this moment. You will have raised part of you from the dead, raising yourself from the dead, right? Being in this moment. And then you will notice, the thing about this work is, it must authentically impact your 3D experience, otherwise it's not for real. If you are doing stuff that is not impacting your 3D experience, then what you're doing is not benefiting you. Because we're here in the 3D for a reason. So it's one thing, you can go to a 7-day retreat, right? And go and be in a 7-day retreat in a really beautiful ashram setting with people that are really nice to you and very nice food and everyone's well behaved. And in that environment, it's very easy to walk around and waft around and be one with everybody, right? And so you do that for 7 days and you feel all groovy. And you go like, I'm really spiritual. And then you go to work on the Monday morning and you can't even handle the traffic, right? And the people in the office are just like even louder than they were before, right? And you feel overwhelmed by everything. Now, how's that 7-day retreat been of any use? In fact, what you did in those 7 days is escape, is sedate and control, right? And that's using spirituality or spiritual practices as going to them as a reaction to our lives, not as a response. It's very important that if we spend time doing this work, that it truly impacts my 3D experience. In other words, once I go through this anger and I sit with it and it builds up and I go through this alchemical death experience, and then I go through the grief maybe about it, and then there will be tears maybe, and then I'll go into a state of peace. And the interesting thing about the state of peace or stillness that we enter after going through an alchemical experience is that space contains with it insight. Now what's happened is a part of our capacity to see within, which is through the eyes of feeling, that feeling part of us was shut down because we were using that feeling to suppress. We were suppressing those feelings of anger. And by suppressing the feelings of anger, we were suppressing that feeling mechanism in ourselves. We were suppressing part of our feeling body. And when I allow that anger when I sit in that anger and I feel it at its fullest, it awakens that feeling capacity. It awakens insight. And once that insight is awoken, I will be able to see something more clearly about my experience that I never could see before. The thing about the mental body, or approaching this work mentally, is that we have this belief that if I understand something, then I've healed it. So I sit and try and understand. If I can just understand. Once I've understood, now I've healed. But actually, that's back to front. We have to enter the shamanic experience, the alchemy experience, and go through the energetic transformation within us. And once we go through it, we will receive insight about what that was about. So maybe in that stillness afterwards, and I sit there and I go, I know what was going on there. He's been reflecting my stepfather. Yeah? He's been reflecting my stepfather from when I was young. And the reason I was mad at him is because I was mad at my stepfather. And I never got to resolve that. That's what was going on. I never could see that before, right? But the insight isn't even the most of the fruit. The real fruit is when I go to work, right? I go to work in the morning and I find I'm not in a hurry because I'm not trying to impress, and I find that I'm on time. It's just things are just flowing. And I walk past his office and there he's sitting, and now I see him. I don't even see this boss person. I don't see this father figure. I don't see this. And I see him, and I actually, because I've become more intimate with myself, I feel more intimate with him. So I just actually go, hey, how's it going this morning? Right? Start chatting. And we've never really chatted before, because I never saw this person before. And while we're chatting, he feels more open to me because I'm more open to him. And he says to me, you know what, I've just been having a problem lately. And I say, well, what's going on? He says, man, I'm constipated. I've got this. It just makes me feel like I'm growling all the time. I'm really constipated, right? And I will realize that it had nothing to do with me in the first place. It was just a mirror. Right? And because I've had insight about my own anger, I'll say to him, you know what constipation is? Can't stop hating. You just can't stop hating. You're just so angry about something, it creates so much heat in your system, something you can't stomach to even deal with. It dries out your stomach, and you can't even have a decent bowel movement. You can't deal with your shit because you're so angry. Now we get closer that way. When you deal with your shit, it brings you closer to everybody else. That's the way it is. But what happens is, it will have impacted my 3D experience. That's really important. Alchemy, when I truly do unto myself as I would have others do, it will impact my entire life experience. And the nature of this work specifically. So I say to people, and they don't get this initially, you can't do this work in groups. This is not group work. The group is useful, like what we're doing here, where I'm communicating the necessity for the work to you and the different dynamics of the work. But actually, the real work is when I'm sitting alone, by myself, with my anger, comforting myself, being compassionate with myself because I'm going through such a traumatic experience. Now I'm comforting, parenting myself. That's the real work, by myself. So that's what we were saying earlier. This work takes you into aloneness for a reason. I need more space so that I can be with this with myself. But the funny thing is, when I'm able to be with myself, the more intimate I become with myself, because that's what this first part. When I go to my anger and my fear and grief on the basic everyday upsets, and I use them as a means to go into my emotional body and be with myself, this begins the journey of intimacy within myself. That's where it has to begin. I have to develop a relationship, a conscious relationship with my own heart through my feelings, through what's going on in my feeling body. And the funny thing is, even though I may now go away from all the group activity I used to do, because groups have a function. There are certain activities that require groups, right? In this place, they're going to teach people how to build boats. You don't go by yourself to learn to build a boat. You go with a group and people, and you work together. And there's places where group work is very valid. But in the actual intimacy work, when I'm actually going through the shamanic, alchemical experience, that by myself. Where I need to lean on someone else to do it is where I don't grow. It's the very place I won't grow. But the beauty of it is, as I go deeper and deeper into myself and become more intimate with myself, a funny thing happens. I may not have a group anymore, but everyone is going to become my group. I'm going to become more intimate with every human being around me. I won't have select groups. Everyone becomes part of my group. In fact, I enter the group of humanity. Right. And the thing about this work is the different stages. The main thing about this initial stage of intimacy with myself through these daily upsets is intimacy is really about the dismantling of relationship. It's a funny thing. You know, I want to do a book on intimacy and people assume it's a relationship book. No, it's a book about dismantling relationship. Relationship is a structure that forms around an unintegrated emotional body. It is a matrix that forms to maintain that unintegrated emotional body. And we'll see that as we go on further today. That relationship is just a structure in which we can operate with our unintegrated emotional body. So I will create relationships to express that lack of integration in the world, right? So in myself, since I was a child, because my beingness was not acknowledged as of any value, and only my doingness was encouraged, that my value was through my doing, not my being, I created a persona who does things in a certain way. And that persona does things in a certain way because that persona gets appreciation, is nice enough to, so it doesn't cause any conflict and can feel safe, right? And it's a false persona. It's got nothing to do with my being. Not only does the world have a relationship with that persona, but so do I. I have a relationship with this false persona and I judge myself according to how this false persona is doing, and I try and perfect it and master it and craft it so that it will be perfectly acceptable in the world. And I'm consistently having a dialogue with this false persona and letting this false persona tell me about my state of being and what's right and what's wrong. And this initial journey of intimacy in which we're looking at our daily upsets, random upsets that happen to us as a means to begin working directly with the emotional signature. This is about dismantling the relationship I'm having with this false persona. We don't want to have a relationship with this false persona anymore. We want to dismantle that relationship. And to do that, we want to have a relationship with what's really going on with us, right? With the true, what's valid, what's authentic. And the thing about authenticity is this, which is really hard. It was difficult for me to get, but when I got it, it was kind of funny. Authenticity only comes from authenticity. Authenticity only comes from authenticity. When we first hear about authenticity, we think it's some sort of moral code. Like if you behave in a certain way, that you're authentic. And so how do I behave to be authentic? Right? It's one of the shortfalls of describing ourselves as a spiritual person. One of the shortfalls of describing yourself as a spiritual person is, in order to give yourself that definition, you have to have a definition of what it is to be spiritual. Spiritual people do what? They wear certain clothes, they read certain books, they eat certain food. There's certain things that I must be in order to be a spiritual person. I will have a definition, right? And when in any moment I'm asked to be authentic, and that authentic behavior is not in line with what I think is spiritual, now I can't be authentic because I'm being spiritual. Now I've got a problem, right? So authenticity is really about being authentic. In other words, if I'm confused, the most authentic thing is to be confused. It's not authentic to go, okay, I've got to get clear. No, be confused. Because through being with the confusion, the energy underlying that confusion, which will be an emotional signature, can then move on to resolution, and that confusion will be resolved, that confusion state. But if you then say, I shouldn't be confused right now, I'm supposed to be clear, now you're going to suppress and sedate the experience you're having, and you're going to be inauthentic to try and become authentic, right? So remember, authenticity comes from authenticity. It's the same thing as effortlessness only comes from effortlessness, right? So a lot of the stuff that we're trying to do and put the effort in so that we can make things effortless, it's never going to work. It doesn't actually require much effort to be with ourselves as the way we are. Once we give ourselves that permission, it's actually kind of a big relief. I can just remember that we've come into a world that has a preconceived idea of how you're supposed to behave. And you have judged yourself according to those preconceived notions. And a lot of our suffering is based on trying to live up to those things. And the fact is, the way you are in any given moment has always been what's most appropriate, has always been true. It's always been true. When you were a child, the way you were was actually true. And the way that you felt about things has always been true. And once you realize that and allow yourself to be with that, there's a saying, the truth will set you free. The truth will set you free. And the truth isn't some model behavior. The truth is what's really going on with me in this moment. That's the truth. My point of growth is whether I react to that or I respond to that. And this was one of my revelations too. You know, the way we're brought up with our religious and spiritual indoctrination is we get to believe that if like Jesus walked in this room now, there would be like glowing, right? There'd be like all this glowing stuff going on, and maybe these angels going, right, all this stuff going on, so we'd know it was Jesus, right? But actually, because we think that he would be having an experience completely different to ours. And then one day I got, there is only this experience. This is the only experience going on right here. This moment is the only one. Of course, my interaction with that experience is determined by to what level I'm reacting to it or responding to it, right? That's what determines what's really going on. And for example, a person like Buddha or Jesus or these beings that we looked up to, really, their power was in responding to what was going on as opposed to reacting to it. And in that response, they would respond to it within themselves, and things would happen around them. They weren't doing anything to anybody else. And Jesus never did anything to anybody else. I do unto myself as I would have others do. Right? I go into myself. And that was demonstrated once we do this work, what we'll start to see is that, for example, our religious approaches, our approach through religion to things is very much physical, mental approach to what is actually heart-based work, right? And so let's look at containment through the eyes of, say, Christian teachings to really see what's going on. And this is modeled to us in the last moments of a being like Jesus' life. Let's look at this absolute demonstration. And the word demonstrate is great because it means demonstrate, demons straight. Put those demons straight, right? So let's demonstrate what's going on with Jesus, right? First of all, let's begin with the kiss on the cheek, what we call the betrayal, right? If I come into the office in the morning and I walk past the door and I look at him and he goes at me, right? And I get upset. In the moment, why am I really upset? Because he betrayed me in that moment. I felt betrayed. I'm not appreciated. I did all this work. I've been betrayed in this moment. Whenever we get upset, if you really look at it, if you really look what's going on inside of you, when you get upset about everything, the reason you're actually upset is because you feel betrayed in that moment. You're not seen. This is not how it's supposed to be. It should be different. I feel betrayed, right? The way you spoke to me, I don't deserve that. Whatever. It's a moment of betrayal. And the moment of the betrayal is not an upset. It's a setup. It's a setup. It's deliberate. And anyone who can entertain the belief that Judas wasn't on Jesus' side is delusional. Because a being as smart, as evolved as Jesus, you couldn't betray that being if you tried, unless they arranged it. The betrayal is always arranged. It's a setup, not an upset. In fact, Judas was probably the only person Jesus could trust to do the job. But who's going to betray the master so that the job can get done, so that the demonstration can happen, so that the demons could put straight, right? And what happens after the betrayal? Jesus is taken to Pontius Pilate, right? The dictator. And who's the dictator? The mental body, right? And there's a question that's asked. One of the most important questions that's asked of Jesus when he's brought before him. It says, are you who they say you are? Are you who they say you are? Are you the persona you created so that you can feel okay in this world? Are you that person? Because if you are, I will set you free. I'll let you go. But if you're not that person, you must die. You must die to the illusion you've been entertaining of yourself. Right? And that's when the shamanic experience begins. So that's a very important question. Ask Jesus, are you who they say you are? And he's not. He's not the persona that anyone has put on him. He's not even the person the church says he is, right? I'm not the person. I'm not the person I created so that I can feel safe and comfortable and acknowledged by the world. That's not who I am. That's created out of my doings because my being isn't accepted. And if you're not that person, you have to die, and that's the beginning of the shamanic experience. And the first step, when you know that you have to die, to that is fear. It's the first step, right? So in that moment, a person like Jesus, you better believe it. When they go, you're going to be crucified. It doesn't matter how evolved you are. You're going to be in a state, the fear is going to come up, right? And did he try and explain his way out of it? Did he say, actually, you know what? It was Judas. You know, it was them. I was just like, I happen to, really. No, really. I am actually king of the Jews. Let me go, right? I'm the king, right? He didn't. He contained it. Didn't try and explain his way out. He didn't go into the story. He didn't go into the behavior. But you better know that there was fear there. There was fear all around him for what was happening. And he could feel it, right? Then the walk up to the crucifixion, right? What goes on? They throw things at him, they spit on him, they throw urine on him, throw feces, beat him. Now, if you yourself had to go on such a walk, I'll guarantee you that if people do that to you, you're going to get really, really pissed off. You'll get really enraged if people treat you like that, right? Did he say, stop it, I'm the Messiah, I'm the guy, don't do this to me, right? I don't deserve better. No, just allowed it. Why? Because he required the rage, right? The rage, the anger is important. It's part of our jewels. It's energy, right? Require that build-up of energy. And then arriving at the crucifixion, what's happening there? There's the two Marys, right? Mother and Mary Magdalene, right? There's other people around there who are in a state of deep grief about what's going on. There's going to be a resonance of grief. Any demonstration of grief? No. Contain it. Contain it. Why? Require this nutrition. Our fear and anger and grief is a nutrition. If we digest it, it will awaken, it will give growth to our state of being, not our doing. And it must be digested through containing it and digesting it, right? And so we can see the metaphor of the crucifixion is so clear. When you really get what this work is about, when you get that there's nowhere you can go with your hands, that nothing you can do with your hands that will help you. There's nothing you can do to save you from feeling what you have to feel. That actually your hands, you've just been using them to sedate and control what's been going on in your own heart. All your business with your hands. Then you might as well nail your hands down because they're no use to you. And when you realize that there's nowhere you can go with your feet, you can go through any sacred site, any temple, anything. Anywhere you go, wherever you go, there you are. The universe will deliver your upset to you on a silver tray, no matter where you are hiding on the planet. There's nowhere to go. Wherever you go, there you are. Then you might as well hammer your feet down because they're of no use to you anymore. In that moment, and also when you realize that thinking is useless, then that's when the crown of thorns goes on. You know, that bleeding head, get rid of that. You know, that bleeding head is no good, right? Get rid of it. In the East, they say, if you want anything real, come to me with your head in your hands. The head serves no purpose in this work. Any thinking only stops, right? And then if you're in that place, because the moment we get set up or upset is a moment of crucifixion. That's what the crucifixion is. Because from that moment we start the walk from the fear, the anger into the grief. And if we struggle with it, it's like struggling when you're nailed to a cross. It's just like really more painful. Right? And what happens is then we go through a death experience. That energy, that fear and that anger and the grief that builds up, builds up, builds up. And we will get to that experience, that death experience where there is no hope, there is no future, because we are actually dying to something of the past. We're dying to what's not true so that we can be born again in the kingdom and move out of the boredom, right? The kingdom is the moment. And we know that Jesus went through that experience, the death experience, because he actually voiced it. Father, why have you forsaken me? That was his moment of dying to these situations, going through the death experience. But if you stay with the death experience, you will raise yourself up into the moment. We know it took him 3 hours. It took him 3 hours to go through the entire alchemy process. But what we don't know is that he practiced for 30 years, right? Containment, you have to practice containment. Many of our practices you will see when you really look at meditation practices and what they're about, and all our spiritual practices, when you really look at them, what they boil down to is containment, practicing containment. And containment is an art. It's the wax on, wax off, wax on, wax off. And we're practicing containment. Every time we get upset, we're being given an opportunity to practice containment. And it's not about perfection. That always leads us into distraction. You're not supposed to do this work perfectly. You're not supposed to try and become perfect. Your vibrational self, who you really are, what you really are, is already made perfect. Your experience may be in a state of imbalance or evolution, and that's where the work is. But what you are is perfect. So it's not about perfection, it's about participation, not perfection. And the point of participation, if we really want to participate in the evolution of this planet, in the evolution of our species, and in our own personal evolution, the point of participation is whenever we get upset. That's the perfect place. It'll come to us. It'll be shown to us. And when we take every one of those moments as an opportunity to do alchemical work, there is no greater participation, because that is going to make real impact, a real irreversible and everlasting impact on any experience we're in and moving through. It really makes a real change. What we do unto ourselves, we do unto ourselves what we would have others do. And when we come back from this break, we're going to look at how our family is really the cross we come here to bear. And why that is so, right? Where's my cross? Well, I'll show you after lunch. So when we look at that story, we can see that as we get into our own heart work and start to comprehend the works of the heart, we will start to see a lot of what we call religious scripture in a whole different new light. That it wasn't about what Jesus was doing, it was about what he was being. It was the state of being that's important. Can I be with what is, or am I going to do something to stop it again? Right? And that it's a practice, and that containment is an art form. It's an art form that we continually practice, and every time we practice, we can contain more and more. The more we can contain, the more insight we can contain, the more revelation we can contain. And also container is like a cup. The more we can receive. Everything is being given, but how much can we receive? And we can only receive according to how much we can contain. Right? And that's what I was saying earlier. If I can't contain my anger, how do I expect to be able to contain an awareness of what I am, let alone what God is? Right? They go hand in hand with each other. So let's take an hour and a half for lunch, and we'll be back here at 1:45. 1:45. Okay, we'll be back here at 1:45. And we'll continue on with looking at work with the family, looking at work with a companion, and maybe we'll have some time after that for questions and answers. But by that time, I'm sure you would have contained enough for today. Thank you.